You're listening to Season 2 of the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show.
With every stroke of the pencil, I'm giving you folks a glimpse into my experience.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today's guest is one of the most likable guys coming up in the food tech world. We've gotten to know each other a bunch over the last couple of years. His name is Matt Wampler, and he is the co-founder and CEO of a company called ClearCOGS. And what they do is leverage predictive analytics, AI, machine learning, all those things that you keep hearing about to help you understand and accurately forecast how much you're going to sell. And with that information, they can then help you understand things like how much you should prep. They're doing this typically for very large-scaled organizations. And what I really like about what they do is they just make it really easy to get this information, just sending it to you directly every single day. But a lot of what Matt and I talk about today is his background coming up in the franchise world. Actually, he ran a bunch of Jimmy John's. And I was just really curious to learn what it's like to start from the beginning in a franchise. And, what kind of resources do they give you? What's difficult? What seems easier because you have the processes in place and things like that. So it was really fun to learn more about that part of his world and his background. And then, of course, we talked a bunch about, how he decided to build this company, ClearCOGS, and he's helping a lot of companies like Jimmy John's to just waste less food. I think that's a big part of what they do at ClearCOGS is just try to help you understand how you can waste less food, which is a good thing in this world. Anyways, I really enjoy talking to Matt and hearing how he's building his company. And as always, I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I do. You look, good as always. I think that your shirt says ClearCOGS, and I believe your hat says it as well. You definitely represent.
Wear the same outfit every day.
Yeah.
Makes life really easy. I mean, I assume you have like 5 of those cardigans.
Everybody asks for that, and yes, I do. I have 6 of them, actually. And I have a bunch of these t-shirts, and it's just the same thing every day. I get cold inside, so even when it's hot outside, I keep a cardigan with me.
Yeah, maybe once we raise our Series A, I can stop being branded at all times. Right now, I'm a walking billboard.
All right, well, here's where we're going to start. We can talk about your personal background, but just to wind everybody up, you, at a very young age, at around 21, I think, took over a Jimmy John's franchise. I don't know a ton about Jimmy John's, and I also don't know a ton about taking over a franchise. We did some franchising. I used to be at this company called Orify Brands. I mean, we owned, Five Guy franchises and a couple other things. But I really wanted to start there with your perspective on what was it like running a Jimmy John franchise?
Well, let me say this. I didn't know much about running a Jimmy John's franchise when I took over one, or what taking over a franchise looked like.
Oh, by the way, what is Jimmy John's?
So it's a sandwich shop. There's about 3,000 of them. It's right out of Illinois, mainly Midwest based, but they're all over the country. And now we're owned by Inspire Brands, along with, quarter of all restaurants or something like that.
Nice. So it's sort of like a different type of Subway?
Don't throw us in the Subway bucket. I'd say more like Jersey Mike's would be a good comp. No hot sandwiches. It was just straightforward. We're baking the bread every day. We're slicing the meats every day. High quality ingredients, great sandwich. One of the things that we really sold was super fast service, and we dominated first party delivery for sandwiches. So for a long time, it was you're sitting in your office and you wanted to order food. It's like, I'm not going to order a pizza. There wasn't third party delivery. Jimmy John's was pretty much the only game in town.
What's the menu like?
Really simple. I mean, we're talking about 6 meats, maybe 7 veggies. I think total sandwiches, there were like 17 of them. There was no soups, no salads, nothing fancy. They've added a lot to the menu ever since. But it's pretty straightforward.
So, what was it like taking over a Jimmy John's franchise?
Man, it was a disaster. So, I got into the restaurant industry because, some guy had run his Jimmy John's franchise into the ground and basically needed a patsy to get out of the lease. And I was the 21-year-old kid that probably didn't ask the right questions or know enough to know that it was going to be a total shit show. And that is exactly what it was. So, I walked in, just graduated college, didn't know anything about restaurants. And man, it was, I think they were down to like 4 employees. It's July. There's no air conditioning. It's in DC. So it's, 110 degrees in the kitchen. They had ice buckets on top of the compressors to keep the cold tables from overheating. Like the grease trap was overflowing. It was a disaster. And yeah, it was, I give Jimmy John's a lot of credit. They provide a playbook. The reason I was successful was because they basically said, follow this list every day and execute, and you'll be successful. And at 21, 22, I could follow the list and I could put in the hours.
So why did you take on a Jimmy John's franchise?
That's a really, really good question. I asked myself that for a number of years. No, it was really simple. So I had an option to go out and do investment banking and sit in a cubicle and run numbers. And, the other option was to go out and run a sandwich joint. The person at the investment bank had actually just done a deal with Jimmy John's and said, like, hey, this is really interesting. You should take a look. And, I'm ADD and dyslexic and was like, hey, I don't want to be in a cubicle. Like, let me go take a shot. And my dad was on the side of it, like, you have nothing to lose right now. If you're ever going to roll the dice in your life, you don't have a wife right now, you don't have kids, go after it. And so that's what I did. And it was the best decision I ever made.
Did you have to purchase this, or was it sort of just bequeathed to you? Like, how did it,
I had to purchase it, and there were a lot of hoops to jump through. I didn't have a whole lot of savings, but I had to clean out all my savings, and then I begged my parents to basically co-sign a loan with a bank. And, it's one of those, your options are success or bankruptcy. So, you make it work.
Yeah. Yeah, the first restaurant that I opened of my own was in 2008, and I don't come from money at all, but I did have like a mutual fund or something that my grandfather had set up for me that had a decent, I think there was like 30 grand in cash or something in it. Just threw all of that into the restaurant, and every dime I had, didn't pay myself for like the first year. Man, I'm so fascinated with taking on like a franchise or a place that already has like systems in place, and what that can do for you to actually give you the freedom to do other things. What was that sort of like learning curve like to like, how do they give you these like systems? And I have to imagine that like it's something like a Jimmy John's, there's like just a ton of systems and processes, and here's how this works. How did that happen? Did they just sort of hand you a bunch of documentation, or is there like a, orientation, or what is it? Do they give you like certain software and train you on it? Like, what is that like?
No, there's training. They send you off to a 3-week training, camp, and then, you go do an apprenticeship for 4 weeks. So you at least have some idea what you're doing. But, it's the little things like, how often do I clean the ice maker so I'm not getting mold buildup? And how often am I going and scrubbing the mop guards in the back of the kitchen? These are things like you don't necessarily think of, but somebody has. Through trial and error over the years, Jimmy John's come up with these, this playbook. So like we had our daily list of cleaning items. And, as long as we did those, the store stayed in good shape. One of them is go check the light bulbs every morning so the lights are working, which just makes things a lot easier.
Yeah.
But I will say, going back to your original comment, I think the proudest moment I had in my life was when I opened the second store and the bank loaned me the money. And there was no cosigner, and the lease was signed under my name personally. It was like, oh my gosh, like I'm a real person. They're letting me take a shot.
That's awesome. So how many did you end up opening?
5.
Gotcha. What is that like? So you start opening up more of these franchises. Obviously, they get more dialed in. You have these systems. You become a better operator, obviously. And then over time, there's a point when you decide to sell it. And who do you sell it to? Is it going to another group that also does these franchises? Like, what happened there?
Yeah, I'll start on the last question. One of the things that's really nice about a franchise is that there's a market out there. There's an active market to sell your units. And so it's nice being able to go list them and talk to the other franchise owners at Jimmy John's and find someone who wants to buy it. But the story leading up to that is, I did my first location and it went well. I think we did it took it from doing 400,000 to 1.2 million over the first 18 months. And, it was cash flow and all as well. But every unit you open, it's just a new set of skills you have to learn, right? So it's one thing to be an individual contributor and run it as the general manager. It's another thing to find, train, and motivate a general manager to run that location. So we opened up the second store and it opened up at half the national average. So it was like, okay, now you got to learn how to run a low volume store and, get it to profitability while making the bank payments. And, then you open the third store. Now all of a sudden you're kind of an area manager with 3 general managers. And now you gotta learn that whole skill set of, how do I systemize it? Then you start purchasing stores and it's like, wow, I got to learn how to do acquisitions and I got to learn how to do these changeovers. So it was always changing what skill set you were learning. But, I looked at getting a pizza shop that was for sale that I loved and I wanted to, and it was not franchised. And even if it was, it would be an entire new skill set to learn. There's something empowering about knowing your systems and your operation inside and out and just having to do that. Once you get into multi-concept, this is why I always watch the independent operators with multiple different concepts. Like, man, I can't even imagine trying to run that operation.
Yeah, it's definitely a different model altogether. I think what I love about sort of multi-concept groups, whatever they are, Letters, Entertain, Star, there's tons of them, is the most important thing is you have to have a very clear vision of what it means to be the business that you are, because you have all these disparate concepts and they act differently and they have different food and different people, but there's something underlying that has to be the same. I always love, when that works really well. I will say, the one thing I learned about, I opened up 4 of the restaurants that I started called Bark. I think the biggest learning lesson when I went from 1 to 2 is just how problems scale. Any little thing that isn't really tight at restaurant 1 is very glaringly, coming to the surface once you have 2 of them. I don't know if you found that.
Yeah, oh my gosh, absolutely. I even remember going back to restaurant 1. I used to not be the best at keeping our cutting boards clean. And you woke up 6 months later and nobody kept the cutting boards clean. It was like, wow. Yeah, problem scale for sure. I was curious, did you have all 4 stores or all 4 restaurants at the same time?
Yeah.
How did you manage that? How do you do systems if they're all different?
Well, I love systems. So we did build a lot of systems. This was also pre a lot of the tech that exists today in terms of checklist technology and things like that. So we just, a lot of this I just built. I would build here's what the opening checklist is. Here's what the closing checklist is. We built all the formulas for how to do, prep and things like that. And, what does good look like for each station? And we just did it all. That was just part of what it's funny because I'm a chef. That's what most of my life I've just been a chef in the fine dining world. But when I opened up the restaurant, I realized there's this other part of me that I really love, which is just building these systems. And so it was really fun. I think for me, actually, what was not so fun about it is, and this is the flaw that I think the mistake I think I made was going too far in the direction of creating systems as opposed to developing people that can think independently. And that I think is the toughest thing to do as you scale is, systems will help you to do things consistently and make sure that you're whatever, upholding compliance things and things like that. But they also create an environment that require people that follow systems as opposed to people that make autonomous decisions. And I think the really beautiful thing, and I think that happens a lot more, with these multi-concept brands, but also can happen with, any type of, sort of franchise as well, I'm sure, is when you can create those first principles of how to make decisions as opposed to how to open up a station. It's one thing to have a checklist of here's exactly how to do it and when to do it and what it looks like versus here's how you should think about the station. It's your temple, right? This is your little business, your world. Every piece of it represents, how you will run your business. And instilling that in them and saying the most important thing is that you're ready for service and that the customers get served as soon as they order. And, teaching them the hierarchy of what's of importance. I found that over time, the systems, you have to continually update them because things change, you know? You get a new type of dishwasher, you get a new prep fridge that requires a different setup or something. But what doesn't change is how you think about the operation. And I think that was a mistake I made in the beginning, that because it was kind of fun to like systematize everything, that I kind of went too far down the path of just, this is exactly how it works, forgetting that like there are people that have to then follow that. And if you want people that all they do is, go box by box by box and check a thing, that's the person you'll get.
So, it's interesting you bring that up, especially being a classically trained chef. So people would ask me like, oh, you're in the sandwich business. And I'd always say, no, I'm in the people business. Like my whole job is how do I take a 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old that, isn't going to college and turn them into their own little CEO of a $1 million business, right? Like, it's grooming general managers. It's the people business. Did you view yourself as being in the people business, in more of the, food business, the systems business? Like how would you define what you were doing?
I would love to tell you that I thought of myself as being in the people business and that hospitality was everything. And that's what it should have been. This was my first foray outside of just cooking in fine dining restaurants. And, at heart, man, I'm a product person. Like that's why I love Meez, is because I just love building amazing product. And I want everything to be just, like I love great product. So when I started my first restaurant, my metric of success is the food is the best and the systems are tight. And that's what I thought about, is like what that means to be successful. Instead of saying my team is happy, my team is motivated, they know what the North Star is, the way that the customers feel is because we do X, Y, Z, right? And, look, we had a successful business. It was, people loved the restaurant primarily because of the product. There was good vibes and things as well. But like, I would love to say that I thought of it that way. Now, today I do, running, my new company. I realize that they're not like just the most important part of your business. They actually are your business. And once you realize that, things really change. But my dumb brain, like in my 20s and 30s, I just didn't click for some reason, But I wish I had, because I think things probably would have been a little bit different, at the very least for my team. But I think I was more of this is a product.
Yeah, we didn't have an option. If you can't control the product and you can't control the systems, all you have is, investing yourself in the team and the execution. So, it's the thing that I loved about franchising. It's the thing that made me successful in franchising. It's also the thing that led me to get out of franchising, because I always wanted to do the 5% that wasn't in the playbook. Mm-hmm. How do you innovate, do something new, play with some of those other constraints?
But you know what, Matt, that's part of what I love about this premise of franchising is, and just generally the premise of like setting up these systems. It's a very similar premise to mise en place, in that like you can't really innovate and be creative unless you have all your shit together, right? Where like you are totally ready for service, so that when these curveballs come or you want to sort of, iterate on something, that you can. And in the same breath, like, I love the idea of an operation like Jimmy John's, where you like handed this playbook and it's like, here, follow this and you'll be successful. Because then, those table stakes things are like taken care of, and you can start to think about, okay, how do I actually motivate my people? How do I get them to make better decisions? How do I make them happier? Because you have like the brain space to think about that, as opposed to thinking about, how do I make sure everybody does this thing the right way? So I kind of think and by the way, I'm speculating because I never run a franchise, but
no, I think you're dead on. And I think you can even throw in there the skill set match. What's it take to be a great restaurant owner versus being a great chef are two very different things. So, if you take out all of the culinary and chef side of it, it opens up to a much wider population of people that could ultimately run a successful operation.
Yeah. It's funny how that it just really does sort of ladder up, right? It's like you can be an incredible cook, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great, manager of chefs in the kitchen. And you could be an incredible chef, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great restaurant owner. And you can be a great restaurant owner, and that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great multi-unit operator. And they're all very different. To your point, what you started this with, that's what's fun about this, right? They're very different skill sets. You have to kind of learn, different things along the way.
It's my favorite thing about Chick-fil-A. there's one other requirement if you're going to go open a franchise. You have to have money. Chick-fil-A is kind of, broken that out where it's like, hey, we have a model where we want to bring in the best operators that are going to do the best job. We're going to remove the constraint of capital. And, I think that's one of the reasons they're so successful. That and the fact that, I'm not going out to own 10 or 20 of these. I'm going to have one, maybe two. And this is going to be my life. And, it's going to be a community affair.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we talked about franchising for a while, but you have a t-shirt on that says ClearCOGS. You got a hat that says ClearCOGS. You got a little emblem in the back that I'm pretty sure is representative of the brand ClearCOGS. So why don't we get into that, right?
We're going to get you a ClearCOGS little cardigan.
There you go. I appreciate that, man. Well, pretend I'm a 5-year-old. Explain ClearCOGS to me. What is it?
As a 5-year-old, we tell the bagel maker how many bagels to bake in the morning so that they don't have waste and they don't run out. If you're a barbecue restaurant, how many briskets do I need to smoke tonight so that I have the right amount tomorrow? That's simple.
I love that. So, and if I may, someone in the tech space, which, by the way, I didn't know that you also learned to code before you started ClearCOGS. Did you build some of what ClearCOGS is today?
Oh, God, no, that wouldn't work. You wouldn't want my code anywhere near our system. But I know enough to be dangerous. I wrote a couple good algorithms, but, there's a difference between writing an algorithm that, functions and creating enterprise-grade software.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm super interested about this space. I remember prior to running meez, I was the CEO of this restaurant group called Orify Brands. We had a bunch of different concepts and we're acquiring other brands. And our main investor had this sort of data team of, machine learning and AI and just running all these models for us to try to understand how to forecast revenue. This was back, 2015 or something. We had a really hard time getting better than like a trailing 12-week forecast. And so and it sounds like you guys you sort of figured out some of this. And from what I understand from ClearCOGS is like the key here is that you're able to predict sales at a menu item level. Is that sort of the bedrock of kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's the bedrock. I mean, it comes from my experience at Jimmy John's. One of those things that wasn't in the playbook were some, let's call it game time decisions. It's 2 hours prior to close. Do I have enough bread or can I shut off the ovens? That's not something that we had a clear answer for. So you'd stick your head out the door and look around. What's the weather like? Are there people at the bar? And then you'd come back and guess. And it's always an emotional guess because you don't want to run out and deal with a bunch of angry customers. You would almost always overbake just to be safe. Yeah, it's maybe $5 or $10 a day in waste. Like, it's not something that, it should keep you up at night. And so we really went in to figure out how do we solve that specific problem. It was the first problem we solved. And the answer was, we're not going to do sales forecasting. We're not going to look at PMix. We're going to go look at how many sticks of bread you're using every 15 minutes for the past 10 years and how the day of the week and the time of the day and the weather and what's on your menu and, local events and all of this limited time offerings, how all this plays into what is the right amount of bread to have. And we found that wasn't enough, right? Going and doing the forecasting is great, but it's still not usable for an assistant manager running the night shift. We then needed to figure out how do we optimize all of the output of these machine learning models into a single number. At this store, on this date, the magic number is 18 sticks of bread. It'll keep you're going to run out 4 times this year, but it's going to be the optimal profit to cost-benefit ratio.
So do you mind if we dig into the nuts and bolts of how that works? So you are ingesting historical sales data, you're ingesting weather, events. Well, let's start with events, right? Because this is one of the problems we had, right? It's like we got to pretty close number, right? And the problem would be the New York City Marathon is next week. Election Day is on Tuesday. The subway station at 23rd Street is closed down for the next 4 weeks. There's a march happening, there's a sale at this place at the Couture spot across the street. And all these things would actually impact, especially in like a very densely populated area like New York City, they would impact business, sometimes pretty significantly. They're doing construction on a road. Like, how does all that get fed into the model?
It doesn't. So it's really simple. If you have basketball games that happen at that college, and it's a regular schedule, and it's happened every season. These are great events that we can work into the models that'll help forecast it. But we had I was talking to somebody earlier this week, barbecue place out in New York, and they were like, we're having the president come speak, or I think it was president speaking or debate that's going to be going on in 3 months. And it was, hey guys, I can't tell you what that's going to look like. There's no precedent for it. So like at that point, you're going to have to make a gut feel. I can tell you what other events have been like, but if we don't have data in the past, it's really hard to make that kind of prediction. And I think people tend to latch onto those. They really probably happen, 6, 12, 18 times a year. It's not something that's happening too frequently. The real money is saved, the $10, $15 a day that happens every day, that you're just marginally wrong on 10 decisions every single day. So we always kind of view those as a shiny object. Obviously, if you've got sporting events in the area, your school schedule, all the holidays, that's all taken into consideration, and we can work those in. Limited time offerings is another big one there. But yeah, if a bus shows up, like a bus shows up. And
yeah, I guess more of what I was asking was accounting for those historically so that there are anomalies, forward looking, right? So if you knew that like in December, there's these 4 days that just for some reason were really dead or really popped, and then again in, August or something, and you can sort of account for those to take that out of the model if they're not perpetual.
Most of what we do is really unsexy, and we don't talk about it too much. It's data cleaning. So,
well, we're talking about it today, Matt, and I find it to be pretty sexy, so.
Your data is really bad, most likely. Manually entered data. You've got catering in there, that obviously you knew about ahead of time and it's going to throw off your forecasts. You're going to have days that your power was shut off and, you're only open half a day or a snowstorm. So, the first thing we go do is we go look at the last 3 years worth of data and pull out every anomaly there are. We'll probably go back to the customer with 10 or 15 items like, what is happening on these 4 Thursdays in a row? We couldn't find anything online. Like, there was nothing in our models for it. They're like, the first 4 Thursdays of the summer, this big thing goes on. It's like, great. Is that going to continue happening? Yes, we're going to add that to the model. So we go through and do that. And then all of the events that aren't categorized, we're actually kind of, watering those down. Or if we're seeing that you're closed, we're backfilling the data so that it looks like it was a fully opened day. And that's probably half of what we do, because if you're feeding these models bad data, you're always going to get bad output.
Yeah. I remember, God, I just vividly remember this so much. The data team coming back to us and what happened on this? I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember. Maybe it was raining. Maybe it was. That's another piece that I think that I'm sure could be helpful is, hey, if it's raining, expect this, because if this is your normal Tuesday, if it's raining, maybe expect this,
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't even have to be specific. Hey, you didn't sell any salmon, 2 weeks ago on Thursday. What happened? Oh, we probably ran out of salmon. Okay, good. That's all we kind of need to know.
Yeah.
But where we see it being really helpful, especially with, franchise concepts, is limited time offers. So I now have a tuna salad, offering. Well, it's probably going to pull away from chicken salad. And being able to, look historically at those limited time offerings that you've done that is similar and flag them for the future, like those kind of things make a big difference.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what is like the delta between really good accuracy and the typical kind of accuracy of a prediction, like the typical trailing 12-week forecast of something versus when you layer on these models, like what is like the delta there that people can expect?
Yeah, so I tend to look more at outcomes. So what is your spread between your actuals and your theoreticals, and how much of an impact can we play there? And typically, and I'm even talking like item by item, typically we're able to close that gap by about 50%. The average is like 52%. When it comes to accuracy, it's always a difficult thing to explain. We live in the world of statistics. If you want to run out half the time, I'll tell you exactly what we think you should have. If you want to run out 1 in 4 days, or you want to run out once a month, there's a different number for that. And depending upon how much variation is in your sales, Depends on how much of a buffer we have to add in that world. So we typically sit down with restaurants, and one of the things they do know is what they want operationally. Like, hey, going back to bagels. You talk with the bagel operator, they'd be like, hey, I can never run out of plain bagels because I do all my sandwiches on them. It would be a nightmare. But man, blueberry, if I would love to be out of blueberry every day. It's like, great. We can set the parameters to get you the number to achieve that goal.
That's cool. So who is like the typical, like what's like the ideal operation that's using this?
Auntie Anne's Pretzels would be, we don't work with them, but I'd like to be working with Auntie Anne's. They have a really simple menu. We're making pretzels. We're making them all day, every day. They're a perishable product. But look, anybody in the fast casual QSR world, typically above 10, 15 units, once you've made that leap of we figured out our systems and procedures, we're not changing hold times or bringing in new equipment. Like we've got our operation on lock, and now we're working on opening the next 50 locations or signing on franchisees that need that playbook. That's really where we fit in. Filling in that last gap in the playbook, systemizing it.
Got it. What do you think like the future state of this looks like? So you guys are building this model now that obviously it keeps getting better, I'm sure. Fast forward 10 years from now, what do you envision this being?
We just got our trademark in for the restaurant co-pilot. I think that's probably a good synopsis of it. How do we create that fractional CFO, COO that sits on top of your data and answers the question, what do I need to know today? Tomato prices are up by X dollars. And if you want to keep your profit and margin in line, you need to raise prices by X, Y, and Z. We find that when you've got these models, they're not just applicable to, prep and production, but they're also applicable to ordering and labor and, all of these other, pricing, you name it. Having one consolidated demand planning system that works in sync across food and labor and everything is really where we look to sit. So opening it up to answering any question and not just the predefined, preset questions that you need every day.
Got it. So is the idea that you want to connect with all of the disparate systems that a restaurant is using, their labor tool, their recipe or inventory tool, their P&L, and just connect to all of those disparate systems and kind of sit over them to pull out?
We kind of already are. A little less on the P&L side of things and a little bit more on the operations management side of things. But, I love a world where, you ask your smartphone, how much bread should I have up right now? And I get an answer. If I were to offer this limited time offering, how would that affect my revenue? And what would I be selling less of? These are things that between the machine learning forecasting models that are available today and, these large language models, I thought we'd be years away. And now I feel like we're a couple quarters away from really being able to answer all of that.
This show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Meez. Meez helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Meez is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Meez in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices because Meez will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Meez podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Meez. That's awesome. And then are you sort of connecting to multiple models? Like, are you like leveraging GPT-4o and Meta or any of these models or multiple models? Like, how are you interfacing with them or not at all?
Well, so this is where I used to be able to truly understand exactly how everything worked on the modeling side. Now I have a conceptual idea of it. So we use a dozen or so different models. And when we go through and look at forecasting, whether it's labor or food costs, we match that specific demand pattern up with the optimal model for that demand pattern. And then it gets auto, featured, engineered to around like, all right, what's the best way to use this model? And this all happens like automatically. And this is why it's so difficult to do in restaurants. It takes 12 models with a bunch of different features on them and getting all of that right to even get the right output before we even optimize it for your, set goals.
Yeah. And is there, like, have you found that that GPT-4 or Lambda or something works better for one versus the other? Or are those models you actually use? Or
for the large language side, we've done most of it on, ChatGPT. And, it's gone great. I have no complaints on it. I don't know if we've really played around with the Lambda side of things too much.
Gotcha.
They still really struggle with math. I think that's one of the, the findings we've had is that you feed it a bunch of restaurant data. It may be able to tell you what your sales were yesterday, but it does a really bad job of trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future or what are those key metrics. It's bad at the math stuff. So we find that for us to effectively use the models, we have to pre-process all the data, get it down to those key individual, you're going to use this many tomatoes tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this is the price of tomatoes. It could then tell you, the total dollar amount of tomatoes you're going to use. So we spend a lot of time pre-processing the data before we ever even get it.
Yeah, you got to tee it up for them. That's interesting. So we've been talking a lot about like all the data that you have to sort of pull in.
Unsexy stuff.
One thing I'm curious about, because, we get asked about this all the time, and it's just a thing that everybody at least in the restaurant space needs and talks about, is POS integrations. And I'm curious, like, hearing from you, because clearly, like, I'm sure that's a big part of what you have to do is like connect with POS systems. Like, what's the work involved for people that don't know in like integrating with a POS system?
So we just integrated with Toast and are on their marketplace. It took us 18 months to go through that process.
What was 18 months? What does that entail?
Toast is a special company. Like, they are the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Everyone's using Toast, and Toast is very selective on who they want to put on the marketplace. And so a lot of it had less to do with the business side or the technical side and more to do with, are you the right brand to be on our system? But, I would say the problem that we face on the integration side with POSs is more to do with the fact that there are so many of them and it's such a fragmented market, and that everyone has a different data structure and everyone has a different way of doing their mappings and modifiers. So it's having to learn all of those systems and then standardize the data in your individual system. And, I think one of the frustrating things, I'm sure this is the case for you, every tech company has come up with their own way of standardizing it, and it's different from the other guy. So like, our data probably looks a lot different than your data.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, what you were mentioning with Toast, like the brand thing, but like, is that really the case? Because they have like if you look at like, whether it's a labor software or inventory software or predictive analytics, like they kind of have all of them on there. What's the discrepancy of like how they decide one versus the other? It seems like it's just like a time thing.
If I knew, it wouldn't have taken us 18 months to get on there.
Yeah, I'm so curious about that. Honestly, again, for everybody out there that might not know, like before you have that integration, what do you do?
I'm gonna plead the fifth on that question.
I mean, just being real for a minute, like I hear this all the time, right? Like, oh yeah, it took us 6 months, 12 months, 14 months. Generally speaking, though, once you are ready to do an integration, Toast, Square, whatever they are, is the lift similar for each system for you guys? Or is it really just like, it's a new world every time you go to a new system?
Well, right now we are integrated with like 52% of, if you walk into a restaurant, there's 52% chance that we are integrated with their POS already. So we've built out a fair number of these integrations. It varies integration to integration, how clean the data is, how reliable it is. But I'd say more than anything else, and this is where you come in, Josh, their recipes and mappings and all of that stuff, that plays a huge part of it. You can set up your Toast system or Square system in a lot of different ways, and that's up to the customer, but it does affect us.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine your business partner, Osa, is owning a lot of this, right?
Yes, he's stuck with a lot of this.
Let's talk about Osa for a minute.
Yeah.
Because you guys met in college, right?
No, actually, we met a couple years before ClearCOGS. I was doing some consulting work and, our paths crossed. And, it was one of those, like, I got on a call with the guy and it's like, we just hit it off. And so I did some advisory work for him free of charge while he was running his last startup. He ended up selling it. And, once I got into this whole coding world and, looked at what restaurants were still doing, like, I think there's something here. He was my first call. And, it took me 6 months to convince Oso this was a problem. Literally, we talked with hundreds of restaurants. He's like, I just don't believe it. And one day we're sitting there and there's a guy with a pencil in his, ear. And he's like, what is that? He's like, oh, it's my pencil. Like, he's like, why do you have a pencil? He pulls out his clipboard. He's like, I write all my stuff down here for what I need to do. It's like, Matt, in my world, they're putting computer chips in people's brains. Like, there's just no way that they're wasting hundreds of billions of dollars a year because they're writing things down on paper and pencils and guessing. And finally, he, was converted. That really is the case. And, the rest was history. We were off and running.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot, like the adoption of technology in the restaurant space relative to other spaces. And I think one of the biggest challenges, one, of course, is just the cost of software because the outcome is tough in terms of like margins, right? Like you go to an Amazon warehouse and there's like everything is technological and there's robots and everybody's got everything, like inventory, I'm sure is like done for you. But the output of that is much higher revenue or margins at least. Or maybe it's not, maybe margins are smaller, but there's obviously the volume is so high. It's the tough part for restaurants is like you really have to be so good because the ROI is always going to be, a question.
So I actually don't think that it's a cost problem. I mean, there are so many inefficiencies in restaurants. You can get an ROI from any of this stuff. It's a effort problem. How much do I have to put into your system to actually get that output? I don't look at it as a technology bottleneck or a capabilities bottleneck. It is operationalization and implementation of technology. If you can build something that's easy and seamless to implement and operationalize, I think that solves 90% of the problems.
I agree. I think we're saying the same thing. And that's what I mean by you have to be so good because you feel all of that, and if it takes 3-4 months until you see any kind of results or outcome that you're even ready to go on a system, it's not going to work. You know what I mean?
So you've raised venture capital. One of the things that they tend to be pattern matching, what we've seen before. And, restaurants are kind of a unique market. And one of the things that we have consciously done that I think that it's always hard to explain to venture capitalists, business model. But if I take an extra 2 to 4 weeks to do that last 10%, to customize the product around your operation and your needs and dial it into that, I don't just get a marginal increase in use or effectiveness. It's a massive increase. It's like that last mile problem of logistics. 90% of it's all fine, but all the costs are in getting it that last mile to your doorstep. The technology thing's the exact same. Everyone brings it up to 90%, but 90% is really not useful in a restaurant. And that's why we've really decided consciously, we're going to go in and customize the software around that individual client and view them as a partner and not a user of our software. I don't know. It seems to be something that's coming up more and more from customers that are saying they're fed up with, here's our technology and you can use it and we're not going to modify it for you. I'm kind of curious how you view that.
So I have a little bit of a different perspective, but it's also because we have a different approach or somewhat of a different space. I think, to be fair, you can't do that for every single mom and pop. You can't customize a thing for every single 1 unit, 2 unit, or even 4 or 5 unit. So one of it is just who are you selling to, right? Because of course, if you have a very large group, yes, of course you should customize that, and that's for sure. I think it just depends on how you kind of getting up the tree. For us, and it's more capital intensive, I spent the first few years of meez just focusing on adoption and how quickly can we get all of your disparate, in our case, recipe information into meez seamlessly without you having to do anything? And how can we make sure that it's even better than it was, by an order of magnitude than it was in your static form? And then how do we get you to start using it day one, right? And all we did was build tech for that for a very long time. You have to do that so that it can work for everybody. And then, of course, over time, you iterate on it. One of the things that you have to do, of course, is just be focused on, you can't service the entire world. So if you try to build a tool for everyone, it won't work. You have to pick your lanes. So it's just a matter of, I think it's just a matter of cost benefit, right? Like, yes, if someone can have you customize something, then that's great. And there are brands where that makes a ton of sense and you should do that. And I agree, like it's, that for them, that's going to make a lot more sense. Plus, likely the brands that are much larger are a lot more dialed in, a lot more, standardized in how they do things. And that means that there's less flexibility in terms of like how software can help them, and you have to, tailor it to them. I think that's really important. So I think it's really just like different ways to skin the cat.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think it is just a different market. We're a little bit more in that once you've gotten your systems dialed in, 15, 20 stores, it makes sense to have something built around you. But I do want to double click into what you were talking about on, the SMB side and getting that figured out. One of the things that we're doing right now is how do we productize our learnings, with these larger groups to be able to provide some simple, easy to use product for the SMB market, something that they don't have to go through and set up and put time and energy into, but a way for them to get exposure and, some insight into how AI can come in and help their operation. One of the hardest things is restaurants have such little bandwidth that, they're not sitting in focus groups, they don't always have the time for feedback. How do you learn from your customers as to what to build, and where do you get those signals from?
There's a number of ways. One, we do surveys, but the majority of what we do is actually look at their actions. So we spent a lot of time building infrastructure to understand all the things that are happening with each customer. How many recipes are you creating? How many ingredients have cost? How long did it take you to add those costs? Where did you get stuck? How did you get stuck? Why did you get stuck? What button did you click by mistake? What words did you, like all the things that it takes a lot of, information and data and volume to see like, oh, got it. That workflow right there is really confusing. We need to create, more clarity around how to get to the end result. And it's just a lot of like analyzing the product. I think what I'll say is, it took me a long time to learn this. And I think we're lucky that like we just, unbeknownst to me, because I don't come from tech, we just happen to be going down this route. Is like the sort of the product-led growth, or sort of like that self-serve motion of building a product that people can just pick up and use, is something that has to be fundamental to your business, I believe, because it's sort of like deciding I want to be the number one restaurant in the world or something, but then just kind of like, kind of going about it the same way that you just a nice, around the corner type of restaurant. Like, you want to be the number one restaurant in the world. Okay, I have to have the greatest ingredients. I have to know exactly where my pears are coming from and my turnips, and I have to have a very clear vision of this thing, and I have like my service needs to be like this, and all these things that like are so much time and energy and cost, but that's a different route, right? So like there's that sort of, it takes a lot more product building and a lot less on the customer facing side of like the customizations and things that you're doing. So for us, like it's just such a part of like the day to day for us, is we're constantly looking at, and we have a lot of tools in place to help to understand, like what are the journeys that people are taking, and if they get stuck, what correlations can we find as to why they got stuck? Is it an onboarding thing? Is it like, in the self onboarding, did this happen or this? And is there a button that got in the wrong place, or did we not word that the right way? Or, when they type, do we need to have more fluidity of the language model to make sure that like this thing doesn't get stuck? And there's just it's fun, but it's just a constant, it's like a daily, iteration. And it's only been 3.5 years. And I feel like it's only in the last 4 or 5 months where we feel really confident that someone can just kind of like pick this thing up and start using it.
Knowing you and listening to you talk about it, I imagine it takes great self-restraint for you not to get in there and be like, no, the button should be here. We need to do it like this.
I'm terrible, dude. First of all, the first like year and a half, my poor CTO, she was just like, because I don't even know. And I'm like telling we have to build this, we need this and this. Now I've learned, how to step back, but I was a madman. And I still, again, like I just love product, man. I love like ideating and coming up with like, what is that? What is like the perfect state of what this thing could be? And how do we like, just like shift the paradigm of how people think about doing a thing? I love that. But it is a different way of going about things. And I think it does service more people. But I think it's just different, right? Because I think what you're doing, first of all, I think it's really smart the way you guys at ClearCOGS went about just solving the problem like as clearly and simply as possible. Like literally like, here's the numbers for the thing today. Do you know what I mean? You don't even have to worry about software, just like, here's the number.
Hey, nobody wants another SaaS subscription.
Yeah. And I think that they're just different. To get that number means you need to know that business really well, and you have to understand the dynamics of it and all these things. And you have to be really personal to that business. They're just different approaches, and I think there's a really deep dive that obviously has to happen in that regard to be able to do that well.
I give Osa all the credit on that. He literally would just say no to everything. You bring me customers that are going to pay, put them on the phone with me. And, he would sit there and be like, why? And eventually they get to like, no, I really need that. Okay, we'll build it. Like, otherwise I had to build just, every bell and whistle that I always wanted.
I remember vividly a dinner. I was having dinner with Osa. I invited him to the Smith in Chicago, or the Loyalist, I think. And he came to dinner with us. And I was talking to him about, it was the first time I ever met him. I think this was like a year and a half ago or something. And it was during NRA last year, I think. And I was talking about product. And I vividly remember that about Osa. Like telling him like the most obvious thing that like, yeah, you should do this. And he's like, nah, not yet. It's like, yeah, I love that, man.
I was, ashamed early on that we sent out email reports, and it turned out to be one of the best things ever because people didn't want to log in, and it was accessible on every device. But, you were talking a lot about, hyper-focusing on, what features you can build and what's next. What's next for meez?
For us?
Yeah.
So, I think we've spent a long time, and we'll continue to spend time building for adoption, building so that like we can be the universal recipe medium, and that every food professional in the world can put their recipes in meez. And if that's all you do, awesome. And now, of course, we've layered on things for your business, like, menu engineering, profit optimization, like, inventory. And of course, because you can get nutrition and allergen analysis, so much that you can do with sort of training and, and making sure that your product's consistent. We're doubling down on that with some more products that we're rolling out. What's cool about where we're at today is, one, we have like over 1 million recipes in meez from all these, all of these restaurants. And because of the way that we focused on making sure that day one, like these recipes are structured, even if they look beautiful, like the thing that you would use in the kitchen on the back end, they're so structured, and all of that data is dialed in, all the yields and conversions and stuff, that like now turning on these additional like features for people is like really pretty easy, actually. It's just about creating a really beautiful interface. So I'm pretty excited about some of the stuff we're going to be doing in terms of production and things like that.
We're not far from a world where you could use large language models to pull customer reviews and match them up with recipes and understand that, this is how much salt should be in tikka masala, or otherwise people say it's too salty, and have kind of that digital brain of what tastes good.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. I think we actually do pull in customer reviews and insights, and that's going to be layered into something that we're launching to help you understand how your menu correlates to other similar menus in terms of your profit margin versus theirs, your volume versus theirs, your sentiment versus theirs, so that you can create better recipes. At the end of the day, like we have this sort of trifecta of there's just 3 things that we want to do, like make sure that we have a really accurate operation, that we maintain consistency, and we create profitability for you, and we significantly increase the profitability of your business. So all the things that we do, we sort of revolve around that. I think what's really fun that I don't want to share too much, but I didn't plan for this, to be honest, but what I want, the future of meez for me is, of course, we're going to always double down on making sure that we have the greatest recipe tool on the planet, which, from a non-biased perspective, I think we do. And we're going to continue to always have a piece of the roadmap that's like, make this recipe tool better, make it better, make it better. But part of this is also that there's, your recipes are your IP. And something that we're working a lot on right now is, how do we help you generate, value and or revenue from your IP? You own it. Like, it's yours, your data, your recipes that you worked on. And so we're working on some really interesting stuff around that we'll share pretty soon.
That's really interesting. I did not think of it that way.
It's honestly always been a part of what I wanted to build because, and again, we're kind of sidebarring here. I don't want to go too much into about me because I want to make sure we stay on topic. But I will say that the cookbook market also in general is just a completely antiquated model, right? I have a shelf behind me with 1,000 cookbooks, but if I want to go make a nuoc cham recipe, I got to go find that book within the shelf of all these things. Got to open up the page. I got to, I'm making it for 8 people, not for 2. And I don't have this, but I have this. And all of that is like time and energy and just not fun, really. Like I want to just be able to just say, I want to make nuoc cham. Oh, here's 3 recipes from your books. And I have 8 people. And I have, Thai bird chilies, not jalapenos. Cool, here you go. And so there's a world where that like should exist. And I think that's certainly in our future.
And do you think that restaurants are going to be, I'm not a chef, cook as a
I
hobby.
will say, I think I saw some bread that you made on Instagram. And I'll be honest, man, some good looking bread.
I can throw it down in the bread world. I'm actually a really good cook.
Yeah, it looks, you know what? I saw a couple things. I think I might have seen some pizza or something. I was like, this guy's got some skills. He can cook.
Oh yeah, I can throw it down. But I was never actually like a chef. But I can imagine that I would never, like me personally, like I like to experiment and make things with what I have, right? Just like an actual chef at a restaurant, like, oh, I need to come up with this dish. Can you give me a recipe for it? Is that how that world works? Like, or is that like the absolute, I would never want to do that as a chef?
What I'll say, and I can't speak for all chefs. I could speak for, a lot of them, I think. We always make something our own, right? So that said, everything stems from something else for the most part. Either, someone invented, this new chickpea miso, right? So that happens, but it stemmed from miso, right? And a process of miso. And everything is sort of iterative. So the idea of taking a recipe and making it word for word, one for one, I don't think anybody, we don't do that very often. I don't do that probably ever, right? But I very often will take something and iterate on it. Right. And so if Greg Coombs has a lobster thermidor sauce, that's his recipe. It's an amazing sauce. I might make it just as is once, but then I'm going to iterate on it and say, you know what? I want to use Amontillado this time instead of brandy. And I think instead of crashing the tomatoes, I'm going to try using cherry tomatoes and burn them a bitter. Like we make them our own, and that's every recipe. What I will say is that it's kind of chaos if you don't have some sort of frame of reference. Like if I just said nuoc cham, right? One of my favorite sauces. It's a table sauce from Vietnam. It's got garlic and it's got shallots or red onions and lime juice and sometimes rice vinegar and fish sauce. And
not a fan of the fish sauce. I'm subbing that out.
If you like it or not, but it's an amazing sauce. That said, there's a ratio, at least for me, that I've used for years, that I always start with. And I learned that ratio, ironically, from Rick Moonen. And I have iterated on it over the years. So I've tweaked some things. I took out the rice vinegar. Sometimes I add peanut butter. Sometimes I'll add coconut milk or some coconut flesh or something. And, different things, right? So I'll always iterate on it. But I have that base. So I always have that base to sort of iterate on. So anyone that says I just do everything from the hip. There are some things you do. If I'm going to take a piece of, a ribeye, I'm going to put it on a rack and I'm going to season it and make sure I season it well from above and let it sit and I'm sear it and it's going to be delicious. But, the chimichurri that I make with that ribeye, there might be a base for that. And maybe I already just remembered it, right? So I know I'm going to have this much garlic, this much, but there's usually some sort of foundation. And then when you get into baking, it's there's always a foundation, right?
I'm not buying that. The bakers love their scientific, everything has to be perfect. My experience in baking is that's not necessarily the case.
Depends on what you're baking. I think with something, there's, first of all, there's wiggle room, right? So whether your bread is a 70% hydration or a 68%, for the average person isn't going to have a lot of impact. But if you're trying to make it consistently, then you're definitely going to, and then there's some things if you're making a sponge cake or something, there's things that you're following. And again, there's wiggle room. You might not weigh your egg whites in grams. You might just use 8 egg whites, but you're going to have some sort of frame of reference. You're going to say I'm going to add some egg whites. I'm going to add some flour,
So Josh, you're a thoughtful guy. I got 2 questions for you. One, today, what is the greatest need for restaurants? What's top of mind for them? And two, I'm curious your thoughts on, everything you just said made me want to go out and get on meez, get on recipes and like make something, right? Like you guys are best in class. What's the world look like? Is it more of the meezes and seven shifts, or is it all going to be gobbled up and you can have one of three giant POS back of house softwares that have every bell and whistle that's kind of okayish?
I try not to predict the future. So I have no idea how that's actually going to all play out in terms of like, is everything going to be consolidated or not? I mean, look, there's a world where that could happen, where Toast keeps getting bigger and they start buying the best in class of things. There's a world where that doesn't happen. And, and things become like the best of this and the best of this. And there's just, maybe there's a middleware that gets created that makes it easier for everybody so that everybody can connect. I don't actually know where that's going. What I will say is, what the restaurants need most, I think, is probably a product of perspective, because, it depends on what perspective you're looking at. I'm a chef, right? I'm a product person. So even if I'm thinking about service and hospitality, whether it's food, for me, like the most important thing, the reason why you start a restaurant typically is because you're creative and you want to be creative. You want to like give the world something, right? So for me, and again, I don't know if this is the thing that all restaurants need, but for me, I want a world where people are creative and profitable. And unfortunately, there are too many times when an incredible restaurant goes out of business. And there are times when a restaurant that is crushes it. That's okay, by the way, because they might be creative in how they think about operations or finance, things like that. But like, I would love a place where like, if you work your ass off and you make delicious food and you have unreasonable hospitality, let's say, and you just love that you can also be profitable. And I think that restaurants are really hard, and that too often people fail because of all the odds that are against you. For me, like the thing that I want all restaurants to have is the ability to be creative and profitable at the same time.
Man, we talk about that all the time, that the hardest thing to do in a restaurant is create that magic, the magic moment, the service, the food, the ambiance. Like, it's really difficult to do. And yet the people that are creating the magic are disproportionately the ones that are not doing well financially. And yet it's the ones that provide a so-so product that have mastered the cold analytics of the business that are succeeding today. And, AI is not going to be able to fix everything, right? It's not going to be able to create the magic, but man, it is certainly good at the cold analytics side of things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's a lot that it will fix. There's, a lot. And there's a lot that it can help everybody. So, I don't think we should discount that at all. And again, I also want, I think that, we look at creativity sometimes as the food, right? Or maybe the service, but there is something to be said about creativity as it relates to the operation, or as it relates to, just the way that you run your business. I think that Chipotle is a really creative company, but the food has been the same for a very long time. I mean, they did bring in some chefs to help, but there's other ways to be creative, to how to think about how to run your business.
So sometimes I wish restaurants were a little less creative, because, you're so good at walking in and there's situations well, I'll just move this person over here and we'll figure this out. And they're so good at that it's, it comes to technology. It's I'll pull in the spreadsheet and we'll do this and we'll do they can find ways to hodgepodge things together in MacGyver-esque ways, which is admirable. Also, long-term, probably a bad decision for them.
Well, I mean, look, man, all sort of cliche aside, that's on us, right? That's on you and me to make it so seamless that they don't even have to think about it. And it's the same as using that spreadsheet, or sort of hodgepodging things together and that's what makes me so excited about this is doing that, right? Is they don't have the time. and part of it is, even when they do have the time, they'd rather spend that time making their food better, making their service better, making their people happier. So these are the things that we can sort of, help with and make it just as easy to use ClearCOGS as it is to pull that spreadsheet up.
And the bar has been set so low, right? From historic technology standpoint, that there are so many opportunities to exceed expectations. Now we just need to get over the bitterness of technology is not going to be all that it, is talked up to me.
Yeah. I mean, look, I love when I find like an app or something that just sort of changes the way that I do things. I'm not going to mention this calendar app because I've mentioned it too many times and they're coming on the podcast in a couple of weeks. I just talked about it so much that I actually had them on as guests.
Well, you're going to have to text it to me later because
I'm kidding. It's called Reclaim. I love when I find something and I'm like, man, what was things like before I used this thing? And that's what's cool about technology. And I think it actually becomes fun when you do that. I think that, yeah, there's certainly times when it gets a bad rap, but that's for a reason, right? Because you look at most of the things that we've gotten in the restaurants, these sort of MS-DOS style things.
We had an intern or an early employee that had never heard of Calendly. And I'm like, let me just change your life. Never going to ask for another time again.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what's cool about software too, by the way, is Calendly is now pretty ubiquitous. But also the idea of a link that brings you to a calendar is now ubiquitous. Everybody has that, right? And they did that. And before them, there wasn't really a thing. And now it's hard to find a software that's using a calendar that doesn't have the ability to like have a link created for you, whether it's HubSpot or Reclaim that does a similar thing. And that's because same thing as a recipe. Someone came before and like did something cool and then you riff on it.
Which means you got to come up with some more stuff, Josh.
Well, let me ask you this question that I ask some folks. I ask it sometimes all the time. What makes you really angry? Like blood boiling angry?
Gosh, I don't get angry that often.
It doesn't need to manifest in like screaming, but like the thing that like when it happens just really like boils your blood.
Okay, so growing up in hospitality, we were very much a team, a unit, right? It's very relational. And I would say that we've always, in every organization I've been a part of, we've always operated under this framework of we will adamantly disagree with each other. We will state our objections, we will talk it out. But when we decide we are going to move forward as a team in that direction, right? We may change directions, right? But we're not working against each other. The thing that probably aggravates me more than anything else is when I think that somebody is working in bad faith, or if I even have to second guess whether or not they may not be giving their all in a way to sabotage something. Yeah. And it doesn't happen very often. We've been blessed with great employees and, we've built an amazing team and we built it around people and not necessarily positions. But yeah, that's probably the thing that gets me the most.
So you really value effort and integrity.
Integrity, effort, look, I value the guy that gets results. I don't know exactly how much effort he puts in or she puts in, but effort to work against, the organization or work for political means, that just gets me. How about you?
So this came about from an exercise I did at this like offsite. For me, it's a lack of attention to detail anytime. So to sort of distill it down, like I really value the pursuit of excellence. So when someone brings me a document or a deck or something like that is ready and it's misaligned and there's misspellings and there's things that like, that might, I don't know, it might seem innocuous. And again, this is personal to me. It doesn't mean that this person is not giving their all, or it might just be they just don't think that they don't consider these things as important. But the attention to detail to me is like, it's the first thing I notice. I'm like, why bring something if it isn't the best thing you could possibly, present? And that's like always the thing that sticks with me. Probably comes from my days cooking, but that pursuit of excellence in all things that we do is like what I value most. And also what makes me, rattles me the most when I see it.
On behalf of all of the type B people, we're not happy with that response. You would like fire me within 30 minutes if I was working.
That said, I try to balance that because we have these first principles at meez, and the first one is operational empathy. So in everything that you do is you have to be, have operational empathy. One. But we are results driven, right? So I don't care if you spend 100 hours on something or you spend 4 hours on something. And by the way, I don't care if it didn't cross the T's and dot the I's. If the result that we asked for, what happened, then boom, all good. And that's why it's a personal value for me, because I also understand that it doesn't need to be a company value. I love it when I see it, but I don't always expect it. And I also know that it can't be contradictory to being results driven, because there are very often times when you need to get something out quickly, and that's okay. And that's where I sort of love that distinction between sort of personal values and company values. They don't always have to be exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a good value to have. I'd say we have the exact same value. You just go about it in different ways. First, our hires is how do we get type A people that are perfectionists around Matt so that, they overcome my weaknesses. It's, again, going back to team building and hospitality, I'm big on how do you build the right team and get the right people in the right places. And then the rest takes care of itself.
Well, this was awesome. And I'm really grateful to have the time to chat with you longer. Usually we have quick meetings. You usually are like, I gotta go. I got another one. So I'm glad that we found, some more time, because you're a busy guy. We're all busy here, and we found more time to chat today. So thank you, Matt. And congrats on all the growth, man.
Josh, I appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.